Okay, these platforms are still designed for men. It's a bit of a struggle to get up here when you're a woman, and it would be fantastic if we saw more women here today, but fantastic that those of you that are here, thank you so much for trying to change the gender balance in our IT industry. That is something that is very dear to my heart. I had to mention it. The only big advantage is, of course, we can all get in and out of the ladies' path. So, you know, that's got to be a bonus right now. We'll take that. We'll take anything we can get while we can get it. All right. Look, I just wanted to, first of all, tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. I have the enormous privilege of being based in Sydney, where I live and raise my family, and still being able to work for this extraordinary institution. MIT is based in Boston. How many of you have been to our campus? Oh, fantastic. How many of you are alum of our campus? Well, you'll qualify. Welcome to the family. Thank you for taking the time to go to Boston and see it. You'll notice that it doesn't look like this. We have 4 kilometres of buildings built right along the Charles. It's very integrated into the biotech industry and the tech industry in general in Boston, which is very much a part of who we are and what we do. So our slogan is Mens et Manus, mind and hand, which means that all of the research that we do out of this institution has got to be connected in some way to industry, to our partners, to people who are going to take it and make it matter. Actually, usually the picture that I have up here, and I'm going to tell you why I have this one in a minute, this is our famous Building 20. The picture I normally have is of a cheetah, which was designed by some of our MIT research scientists, and they spent a long time in the gym. You might like to know that at MIT the gym is not used for very much other than scientists to kind of build things and make them run along the ground. We're not big on physical activities at MIT, as opposed to our Harvard neighbours down the road. So they built a fabulous cheetah. This cheetah could run and jump and land, which for those of you who are into robotics, you'll know is extremely hard to do, to get something to be able to recognise that there are bumps in the ground, jump over those bumps and land, and then be able to continue on. The cheetah has since been adopted by a whole lot of people in search and rescue, in the military for being able to go around and find bombs and take all sorts of equipment down very rocky roads and things. So everything we do is very connected to a purpose at MIT. I work with a series of other research scientists, and one of them that's listed up here, Nick Vandermeulen's been very involved in the study I'm going to show you today. He's from the University of Erasmus. So we too are being disrupted in the world of academia and the world of research, and partnering has become incredibly important to us, more important than I think perhaps it ever has. And we're sharing more than just intellectual expertise. We're sharing ways of doing research. We're looking at new ways of gathering data and new ways of being able to conduct research. So these partnerships are becoming incredibly important to us. We are a research centre within the Sloan School, and typical of all MIT research centres, we partner with industry. These are our 100 partners around the world, and you'll recognise around 20 of those in Australia and New Zealand, which is why I get to live in our beautiful city of Sydney in order to do a lot of work around exec ed and building capabilities within those organisations. They also partner with us across a series of research projects. As opposed to other universities, these projects change very fast. We have a 12-month renewal of projects. Some continue on, but always in a new guise, and always with a mandate that there must be a deliverable at the end of 12 months. So we move fast. The centre was established 42 years ago, and its whole purpose is to work with large organisations. So you'll notice that all of these companies are large corporations that have really tricky problems to solve, particularly now around digital transformation. And I'm sure, looking at nodding heads around here, many of you have got a lot of sympathy with that position. Large legacy systems, this is not easy. We're not platform businesses. We've got a whole lot of challenges. And I think that was pointed out very well this morning by our first speaker. Was it Colin, the first speaker? Yeah, who very eloquently talked about these processes of change that are not easy. They are hard, they're difficult. There is the pit that we all have to sit in for a while to figure out some of these challenges. That's the kind of research that we do at CISA. Okay, so now I'll tell you why I had that photo on the front page, which is not typical of all MIT buildings, and neither is the one below it. This is Building 20. Building 20 was built during the Second World War, and it was built as a temporary structure to house a group of physicists. The reason that the physicists were placed there by the American government was to try and find an answer to all of the stealth attacks that were happening, particularly from German submarines and German bombers, that we couldn't anticipate. So it's almost a classic story of what we've got today. We're trying to anticipate and then intercept a problem as opposed to dealing with it after it's happened. So a whole group of scientists were placed in this building, and their whole objective was to develop radar. They developed radar within a 2-year time frame. They estimated that they took around 25 typical traditional working years of this process. And they worked in this really horrible building. It was falling down. It was built out of terrible materials because all the materials had been taken for the war. It leaked. When it gets very windy and very cold in Boston, those of you who have been, if you've ever been in winter, it's freezing. And part of the cold is the wind. Wind ran through this building. It blew dust. In the summer, it was incredibly hot to work in. But housed in this building was an incredible group of scientists. This is our garage of today, right? They were extraordinary people. And in a very short period of time, they developed some extraordinary answers which arguably made a major contribution to changing the destiny of the war. But after the war, this building was supposed to be pulled down. But what happened was, when all the soldiers came back, there was an influx of people and students who previously had to leave to attend the war rather than attend university. So the numbers swelled dramatically across campuses right across the USA. MIT had one of those challenges, so they maintained this building. It went on for 55 years. Into that building went anyone on campus that they couldn't find a home for. Oh, go to Building 20, just go over there, you know, whatever. Noam Chomsky came out of this building, if any of you are philosophers. They developed Bose electronic sound systems out of this building. There were 9 Nobel Prizes awarded to scientists out of this building. This building has housed more innovation in its 55-year lifetime than any other building on campus. So, what happened? Well, after 55 years, finally, the thing actually fell down. What was going on in this building was extraordinary. People were coming in at all sorts of times of the day. Management didn't care about this building. Could do whatever you liked to it. So they came and they went, and there were no passes, and they drilled holes in their walls. They pulled walls down. They created all sorts of structures there. They behaved in ways that were never permissible in any other part of the university. Not only that, but there were all kinds of people in there. This was a melting pot of ideas. You get the picture, right? Not uncommon in today's world when we build garages, hubs, whatever we want to call them, and we create these melting pots of people. But there was something about this building that was more about than the building in and of itself. So what happened after 55 years? They said, okay, we're going to build a new building. So they got Frank Gehry along, and Frank Gehry designed the famous Starter building. This is, by the way, my most favorite building on campus. This building is stunning. Those of you who've been there, did you go and look at the Frank Gehry building? Yeah? Nodding yes. It's beautiful. And as the light changes on the outside of the building, it's magnificent. But what they tried to do was they tried to create the spirit of Building 20, because Building 20 housed this group of people that were devastated this was being pulled down. They didn't want to lose this garage. So they tried to house the same degree of inspiration and innovation within the new building. But in doing that, they built this incredibly precious structure. Now all eyes of management were on the Frank Gehry building. This was the most expensive building ever built on campus. It was beautiful. Architecturally, it's stunning. The inside of it, the timber work, everything is beautiful about this building. And all people vied in order to be part of it. They carefully selected the groups of people that were going to be on different floors and in different parts of this building. I think you know where the story's heading. It is still it's a great building. It does great stuff. There's not no Nobel Prize winners coming out of it. There's not huge innovation that we saw coming out of Building 20. And I asked myself the question, why? Clearly this is not about the building in and of itself. There's something else going on here. So when we all start to talk about what does the workplace of the future look like, how do we build innovative and exciting workplaces that create inspiration and collaboration and design and interesting ideas, then I have to question how much of it is about the building in and of itself. So, we wanted to find this out. We asked a whole lot of questions of people. I come from a background where I've been studying things around the workplace for a long time and this nexus between technology and the workplace. I've done research on the relationship between IT and HR. I've done research on the relationship around connectivity, about mobile connectivity, remote workers, and more recently about fun in the workplace, looking at things like gamification. So this is an area I am really passionate about. How do we create workplaces, and all of us have a responsibility to this, that create an exciting and innovative place for people to work, and never before has this been so important. Questions that people were asking us was, how do we do this? How do we create these open environments and still retain some sense of security over the things that are precious to us? We just heard a panel talking about security this morning and some of the challenges around that. How do we do that? How do we connect people in ways that is actually meaningful? That doesn't just create a whole lot of water cooler talk, doesn't just create more noise in our innovation, but actually drives us towards a place of more value. What sort of tools do we need? How do we build those tools? Do you own them? Do we own them? How do we build networks? How many I have seen, anyway, we asked for a show of hands, graveyards of enterprise system networks. Yeah, social networks. I'm seeing nods, graveyards of them. I'm not saying they're unimportant, by the way. I'm just going to tell you a little more about what we've seen in research terms around building networks and organizations. How do we create more global activity? And what do we do to attract talent? That doesn't necessarily, and our second speaker from IBM spoke very eloquently about where this talent sits now, all over the geography of not just our country, but our world. How do we attract that talent, and how do we create environments where we can engage with them more effectively? And how some of them might want to sit on the beach, including me, and do work. So we asked that question. What we said we came up with was this definition. What we found was that in the work we've been doing at MIT CISA, we have found that companies who are really successful and effective in a digital environment create more complex customer experiences. They bring together, they integrate products, and in doing that, they create value out of the customer experience. But if they're not very careful, the complexity that we end up with in the workplace will eat customer value experience for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So what we wanted to understand was this. What are the physical, cultural, and digital arrangements that simplify work, that make work easier for our employees, that build what we now call the employee experience? And we wanted to understand how the employee experience can create value in organizations when it is integral to the new customer experience. And the thing we don't know is this is unstructured. We don't know how what new technologies are on the horizon, how our strategies are going to have to change. So this is in a very uncertain world. So that's what we set out to try and do, to understand more about this. The other thing we understood, and we have discovered as we've gone on this journey of research, is that the more we automate, the more we digitize, the more complex the work is that's left behind. We automate, we digitize the easy work to do, and what we leave behind is the much more complex work that requires us to work together and more collaborative around the organisation. So what we see is a whole ton of speed bumps. See this first speed bump here? That's the video conferencing system that didn't work this morning. It took 15 minutes for everyone to get on board, and then someone dropped off because they didn't have internet. And the next one's the VPN, because we've made it really hard. You can work from home, but gosh, it just takes forever to get through that VPN, and when you do, it's really slow. The next one's the printer that doesn't work on your floor and you've got to go down 3 floors. You know, so we create all these speed humps. We make it hard for our people to work. And those speed bumps, we discovered, destroy value quite significantly. So what does it take to build this workplace? What does it take to be able to increase this customer experience? This is what we often do. This is what we found. Yeah. It's fun, huh? Anyone know where this is? Google, yeah. Google in Dublin, actually. This is Google in Dublin. We don't always put swings up, and we don't always put pool tables around the place and do some of these things. But there's been a lot of companies, I'm sure, that many people in this room, in fact, let's have a show of hands of people who have moved in, have redesigned workspace in similar kinds of veins. Yeah? How's it going for you? Okay. Okay. So that's a dramatic improvement. Yeah? Okay. Okay. So new ways of people integrating and talking and working. Anyone else got a story about how this is working? Hi. Right, right. Yeah, so it's not a build it and they will come scenario. Right. This is exactly what we found. This is not a build it and we will come. In fact, we found no correlation in our statistical analysis of 350 companies worldwide. We found no correlation between just doing this and business performance. However, that's not to say that space doesn't matter, because it does. So what we found was there are a number of design levers that we need to focus on. The first one is space, but space as part of an overall integrated strategy of changing the way in which we work. We found that systems, organisations that were really focused around this, did a lot of work around systems, gathering information, making sure information was at the right place at the right time, and really IT systems underpinning a lot of this work. A lot of digital workplace innovation led by IT. Social, I said to you before, there are graveyards of enterprise social networks. There are. But where you see these working very effectively, they're working within this integrated structure of changing the way in which we work. So a lot of work around social and use of social in order to create different ways of understanding the business and the nature of the business. Symbols, incredibly important. Being able to create environments where there is a symbol, there is a way of thinking that brings together the new way of working or the new digital workplace with the overall digital strategy. In this case, I've used Deloitte's green dot. The green dot, not just a symbol or not just a brand that stood out there in isolation, but one that underpinned a whole lot of other work and had 4 pillars sitting underneath it: data, digital, design thinking, and Deloitte Analytics. I'm going to tell you a story in a moment about DBS in Singapore, and you'll see how their symbols were very important in integrating the employee experience with what they were trying to do with the customer experience. Incredibly important part of the whole thing. But here's the big kicker. Around the outside of this sits 2 things: systemic learning and sustaining leadership. We're academics, so we can't remember things unless they all start with the same letter. Have you noticed that about academics? Really very poor at this stuff. Anyways, we had to put the S's on, but they're very important. Sustaining leadership, and when I tell you the story of DBS Singapore, you'll see how they had a whole integrated leadership team focused on building better employee experiences, and then gathering data, gathering feedback, and creating this as a systemic process of evidence-based decision-making that then changes the nature of how we work. And guess what? Around the outside of this is a very iterative process. Again, Colin spoke about the fact that we don't make changes and move towards that changed position, but rather this is an iterative learning process of constantly trying things out, working out what needs to be done, and fixing things as we go along. So keep these 5 S's in mind, and then we went to the next place where we said, all right, well, that's all very interesting. That describes what people can do. It's SWOT is a descriptive model. That's no good at MIT. We have to understand how that then builds value. Does making these significant changes to your workplace add value to your organisation? I don't know. Let's find out. So this is what we did. We're on the first stage of this journey, and I want to share this with you. You are one of the first groups that we've shared these findings. They're about to be published next month. We looked at 350-odd companies around the world, and we found that companies that had higher levels of performance compared to the companies that had a lower level of performance, in other words, top 25% compared to bottom 25% of performance, had very different approaches to the way in which they managed the workplace and the employee experience. And they did these across 2 dimensions. So these companies up the top here across 5 performance measures, a bucket of 100% if you like it, achieved an average of 78% compared to at the bottom here 46%. This is very significant in our research terms. There's something going on here. What we found was a linear relationship, statistically linear relationship between 2 things, 2 buckets of those S's if you like. One of them being employee connectedness, the way in which we're building workplaces to connect people with each other, with the organisation, with our stakeholders, and with ideas, using space, using systems, using social networks. I'll tell you the DBS case will bring this to life. And the second thing that they're doing, which is perhaps the thing that is most difficult, is this area of responsive leadership. And we call it responsive leadership because it's not just about leading the way forward. It's about creating cross-siloed teams of leaders that are able to use the evidence gathered from the workplace, gathered from employees, in order to keep iterating that process. And that was very evident in these stats. What happens here is that this is our tendency. This makes life often easier to do. We build new workspaces, we deploy an enterprise social network, we find ways of getting people to work more effectively together, but we tend to do it in silos. So we'll do it for the digital part of the business. We'll do it for the innovation hub. We'll do it because a particular product manager leading a group of people has got a whole lot of ideas in this space. But until we can lift that and do it across the whole organisation, and what we see is that companies that are in that top percentile are very much integrating this right across the organisation, breaking down organisational silos, creating whole new cultures around the employee experience, and that requires a very different approach from our leadership teams. Let me tell you about DBS in Singapore in the few minutes we have left. Anyone familiar with DBS or worked with them at all? Yeah? Tell me what your experience has been. 2005, yeah? Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. And I did not place you in the audience, so I'm very grateful you're here. So 2005, that's exactly what DBS Singapore was about. This was a reasonable sized Singapore-based bank. They were very traditional, as you well pointed out. They had a very traditional set of offices. People did as they were told within the organisation, pretty much. Set of processes, very well-defined processes. They were a successful bank, but they were very traditional in the way in which they were structured and aligned. 2009, along came Piyush Gupta as their new CEO. And he said a very important thing to this bank. He said, Piyush Gupta is very well known, by the way, for being very outspoken about the fact that he doesn't believe that banking in its current way will continue to exist. And what he said was, our customers at DBS Singapore are interested in banking, they're not interested in banks. They're interested in banking. Banking is a verb, it's not a noun. This changed the whole way of thinking, or started to change a whole way of thinking at DBS Singapore. So one of the first things they did was they had to come up with a different way of thinking and believing about banking, and they created a symbol around joyfulness. And thank you, Colin, again, for introducing joy into the conversation. They said banking has to be joyful. And by joyful, it's got to be, banking in itself is not a joyful process, it can never be, but people and customers have to have joyful experiences. And he was very particular when he developed this strategy around the employee joyfulness experience. Now, here's the thing about employee experiences. This is not about employee welfare. USAA in the US, one of the biggest banks that we deal with, and very successful. They have words just gone out of my head. They have a customer satisfaction record of around 82%. They are extremely successful in banking and in their customer relations. And what they say is, we thought employee experience was about employee welfare and employee well-being, how happy people were at work. Guess what? It's a very different thing. It's important, but very different from the employee experience, which is how we actually get work done. So what did DBS Singapore do? They did a few things. Again, they had their joyful strategy. They backed that up with 3 letters, which were very important in the Asian context that they're in, called RED. They said RED drove 3 important factors into this bank, and everything that they do had to be focused around that. And those 3 things were respectfulness, easy to use, and I've just lost the 3rd one, which I wrote down so I wouldn't lose it, and have dependable. Dependable, easy to use, and respectfulness. Those were the 3 things that really started to guide everything that they did. They built a much more employee-connected workplace, and they're doing this piece by piece as they go through their whole building. So they are changing the nature of the building itself. This doesn't look like banking any longer. It looks like a very innovative, creative place to work. One of the most important things that they placed within that was 40,000 square metres of learning capacity. So they are very engaged in reskilling and re-enabling their workforce. And one of the things that they said was, we all have to be digital. We all have to understand this process. So they run senior hackathons where they have their senior management team working with their programmers. They bring all sorts of people into these learning spaces in order to use these places to re-educate people in working differently. They have a series of social networks which they use to build capabilities and share knowledge. They watch those social networks very carefully in order to make sure that the conversations that are going through them are adding value to grab new ideas from them. One of the ones they've used very successfully is a thing called Ask Piyush, where their employees post reasons why it's difficult for them to deliver on the customer experience. Why am I finding this hard? What's difficult about getting new people on board that are contractors that are having to work with us and getting fast value from them? Those questions are being answered constantly by the CEO. They're getting through and they're breaking down all the bureaucracy and the red tape that did at one point slow decisions down in this organisation. And they're creating a whole lot of new systems and technology around mobile. So they've got a whole lot of apps that guide the onboarding process. They've got apps that guide their training processes. They've got a whole lot of apps that enable things to be fun, very accessible for employees, and change the whole way that employees operate within this bank. The other thing they've done, though, very successfully, is they've completely shifted the way in which the bank is led. They have a customer experience council, and they are currently running over 300 customer and employee journeys. Each one of their 250 senior executives is responsible for at least one of those journeys. Again, those people are well trained in how to run a journey and how to manage a journey, and that's deeply bedded within their whole training system, so they're not just casting people out into the cold to do this. And each one of those customer experience journeys also has embedded into it an employee experience journey. So they are using those journeys and the data that they gather from them in order to increase employee connectedness, build new ideas, create an environment where employees feel that they have a voice in what's happening in DBS. And that has, for them, completely transformed their bank. Last month, they were named the world's leading digital bank by Euromoney, which is one of the Bibles of the banking business around digital banking. This is the first time a bank in Southeast Asia has ever been named in nominated in that category, and they have won that. They are seeing themselves as a completely digital bank. If you're not familiar with them, have a look at some of the work that they are doing. It is quite extraordinary around the customer experience. But they could not do that without the changes they have made in building a digital environment for their employees and completely shifting the employee experience through some of the things we've talked about. Let me leave you with one more example, and then I'll invite any questions that you may have about DBS or any of the other cases that we've studied. One of the things that they found through the Ask Payush environment was that they had a number of new products, new integrated digital products that were available for customers. But these products had inevitably all sorts of challenges associated with them, and things that happen with traditional banking and also with more of their digital banking were leading to challenges within the call center. So customers would call in, it was taking them a long time to resolve these. Because of their bureaucracy, it took a long time for answers to be received and for them to be able to resolve it. They had been known for one of the slowest banks. Within their new culture of making customers joyful, this clearly was problematic. It was also problematic because it was making the lives of their employees really miserable. So what they did was they gave every employee a $200 allowance that they could use to instantly resolve a problem. Now, imagine what leaders of this bank said when Piyush announced that every employee sitting in the call centres right across Southeast Asia had $200 per customer without any form of consultation available to them to solve a problem. So they did was they gathered data ferociously from these transactions. Not only data, numerical data about what sort of problems were being addressed and how much money was being passed over and how many problems this was resolving, but also a whole lot of learning data from their enterprise social networks. They were encouraging their employees to share experiences across those networks, gathering the data from the networks and using those to feed back into the system, which if you go back and reflect on my speed bump diagram, was then put back into the system to keep on resolving new speed bumps. So this is a very active form of management using technology, using all sorts of other HR and facilities capabilities that they have across the bank in order to resolve these issues and build a better customer experience. Very quickly, this is how we measured employee connectedness across these things. You'll see digitization of work is becoming increasingly important to DBS Singapore. As they're digitizing more and more of their processes, they are using that in order to improve the employee experience even further, recognizing that the employee's experience is becoming more complex. Some of the things that they did, particularly around leadership, opened them to employee initiatives. They are building increasingly, they have incentives available for more and more employee initiatives. Management openly sharing knowledge across these platforms, rethinking some of the business rules that they have around security and around some of the ways of thinking about this bank and talking within the bank, and a very much a facilitative management style and a high tolerance of failure. And that's that iterative process that I spoke about at the beginning. Trying things out, measuring it using a very evidence-based approach to shifting and changing the way in which they work in this bank. Challenging and building better employee experiences is critical in DBS to building much better integrated customer digital experiences. So very much a part of what they do. I guess I'd like to leave you and then invite you in the last few minutes to ask me any questions with three things that companies typically do that are in this high-performing 78% group of our organisations that we've studied. And there are three key things that they do. One is all of them connect the employee experience to the integrated customer experience. In every single case, that is a crucial and central part of how they're developing their digital experience for customers. The second thing that they're doing is that they're recognising the importance of talent within this environment and developing their own talent in new ways, building environments that enable them to attract the talent and keep the talent that they need, and rethinking the nature of workspace and the whole working environment within that. And the third thing that they're doing is with a very heavy dependence on evidence-based decision-making and cross-skilling in the management team that run these digital workplaces. And that's my final thought, that we want our employees, their satisfaction and their ability to use our platforms to be at such a high level that when we're dealing with customers globally, the great experience transforms the way in which we provide services and capabilities to our customers. This came from a leading bank in the US, but really, I think, exemplifies what these types of companies are doing. So that's the research we're engaged with. We are doing a lot more at the moment around the talent piece. That's the piece that excites us right now. We have another big survey that's gathering more detail, more data around what's happening in this environment. It's moving very fast. So for us to stay ahead of it and stay relevant, we're continuing to gather data.